The Detroit winter hit like a sledgehammer that January morning. Marcus Webb stood in the parking lot of Webb & Sons Auto Repair, watching his breath form clouds in the frigid air. The shop his grandfather had built in 1967 stood before him, its faded red brick walls holding decades of family history and, lately, mounting debt. At 42, Marcus had inherited more than just a business. He'd inherited expectations, a reputation, and a crushing weight of responsibility that seemed to grow heavier each month. The sign above the garage bay flickered. The B in Webb had been dying for months, and he hadn't found the time or money to fix it. "Dad, the Hendersons are here for their Silverado," called out Jake, Marcus's 19-year-old son, poking his head out from the office. His breath created a small fog around his face. "Tell them another hour," Marcus replied, his voice rough. He'd been up since 4 a.m., trying to finish a transmission job that should have been done yesterday. Everything was behind. Everything was falling apart. The morning sun struggled to break through the heavy grey clouds hanging over the city. 8 Mile Road stretched in both directions, lined with businesses fighting the same battle Marcus was, survival in a neighborhood that had seen better days. The old auto plants were gone. The money was gone, but the cars kept breaking down, and people still needed them fixed. Marcus walked back into the garage, the warmth from the space heaters barely making a dent in the cold. 3 vehicles sat in various states of disrepair. His 2 mechanics, Danny and Pete, had both called in sick this week. That left Marcus, Jake, and their newest hire, Sarah Chen. Just thinking her name made Marcus's jaw tighten. She'd shown up 6 weeks ago with a resume that looked impressive on paper. 2 years at a Honda dealership in California, ASE certifications, glowing references. She was 28, spoke quietly, and had these intense dark eyes that seemed to absorb everything around her. But in Marcus's shop, she was a disaster. She moved too slowly, asked too many questions, dropped tools. Yesterday, she'd stripped the threads on an oil pan plug, a rookie mistake that cost them an hour and damaged customer property. Marcus had chewed her out in front of Jake and the customer, his frustration boiling over. "You're good for nothing," he'd said, the words leaving his mouth before he could stop them. "My grandfather could do better work than this, and he's been dead for 15 years. Sarah had stood there, wrench in hand, her face unreadable. She'd simply nodded, cleaned up her station, and gone back to work. That quiet acceptance had somehow made Marcus even angrier. Now, as he surveyed the chaos of his garage, Marcus spotted Sarah in the far bay, working on a Ford Explorer. She was on her back on a creeper, sliding under the vehicle with a trouble light. Her movements were methodical, careful, too careful, Marcus thought. Too slow. "Jake!" Marcus barked. "Where are we on that transmission?" "Just buttoning it up now," Jake called back from under the hood of a Dodge Ram. "Should be ready for the test drive in 20. Marcus grabbed his clipboard and reviewed the day's schedule. They had 6 cars booked, 2 waiting for parts, and 3 diagnostic appointments. With only 3 people working, it was impossible. The math didn't work. The money didn't work. Nothing worked. His phone buzzed. A text from his ex-wife, Linda. "Jake's tuition is due Friday, don't forget." As if he could forget. As if the number wasn't burned into his brain, right next to the mortgage payment, the supply invoices, and the banknote he'd taken out to replace the lift in Bay 2. Marcus shoved the phone back in his pocket and walked over to Sarah's bay. She was still under the Explorer, the sound of ratcheting echoing from beneath the vehicle. "Chen!" he called out. "What's the status?" Sarah slid out from under the vehicle, her short black hair dusted with rust and dirt. She had a smudge of grease across her left cheek. Those dark eyes looked up at him without emotion. "Rear differential needs a complete rebuild," she said quietly. "The gears are stripped, probably been driving with low fluid for months." "I didn't ask for your life story," Marcus snapped. "How long?" 4 hours, maybe 5. I need to pull it completely and— 4 hours? Marcus felt his blood pressure rising. Danny could do that job in 2.5. We don't have 4 hours. We don't have 2 hours. Sarah stood up slowly, wiping her hands on a shop towel. She was small, maybe 5'4", and had to look up to meet his eyes. But there was something in her expression that Marcus couldn't quite read. Not defiance, not fear, something else. "Danny would rush it," she said evenly. "The seals need proper seating time. The gear mesh needs to be measured precisely. If I rush this, the customer will be back here in 3 months with the same problem. If you take 4 hours, we won't be here in 3 months," Marcus shot back. "We'll be out of business. Do you understand that? Every minute you waste is money walking out the door." A muscle in Sarah's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She just turned back to the Explorer and started organizing her tools. Marcus walked away, his hands shaking with frustration. He knew he was being harsh. He knew he was taking out his stress on someone who didn't deserve it. But knowing it and stopping it were two different things. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of work. Marcus threw himself into the transmission job, his hands moving with the muscle memory of 25 years in the business. This was what he knew. This was what he was good at. Metal and oil, gaskets and bolts, problems with clear solutions. By noon, the temperature had climbed to a balmy 18 degrees. Marcus stepped outside for a break, his back aching from being hunched over the engine bay. He lit a cigarette, a habit he'd picked up again after the divorce, and watched the traffic crawl by on 8 Mile. The neighborhood around his shop told a story of decline. 3 storefronts on the block stood empty. The diner next door, where his father had eaten lunch every day for 30 years, was now a dollar store. The hardware store was a check-cashing place. Change wasn't always progress. Jake emerged from the shop, pulling off his gloves. "We've got a problem," he said. Marcus closed his eyes. "What now?" "The Henderson Silverado, the transmission you just finished. It's not shifting right. Something's off." "That's impossible," Marcus said, flicking his cigarette into the snow. "I checked everything twice." They walked back into the garage together. Marcus started the Silverado and put it in drive. The truck lurched forward. Then the transmission slipped. The RPMs climbed, but the vehicle barely moved. "Damn it!" Marcus slammed the steering wheel. He killed the engine and popped the hood. This was supposed to be finished. This was supposed to be money in the bank. Sarah appeared at his shoulder. "Want me to take a look?" "I've got it," Marcus said tersely. "I noticed something earlier," Sarah continued, her voice still quiet, "when you were bolting up the torque converter." "I said I've got it!" Marcus turned on her, his face flushed. "Why don't you worry about your own work? That differential should be done by now." Sarah took a step back, her expression closing off. "It is done. I finished 20 minutes ago. Customers already picked it up." Marcus blinked. "What?" "Took me 3 hours, not 4. It's documented in the work order." She held out a clipboard. "Vehicle tested fine. Customer was happy." Marcus stared at the paperwork. It was all there, neat and precise. Every step documented, every measurement recorded. He felt something twist in his chest, a combination of embarrassment and anger that had nowhere to go. "Get back to work," he muttered, turning back to the Silverado's engine. Sarah walked away without another word. Jake stood there watching his father with concern. "Dad, maybe you should—" "Not now, Jake." The afternoon stretched into evening. Marcus found the problem with the Silverado's transmission, a simple but critical error in how he'd installed the valve body. He'd been rushing, distracted, and he'd made a mistake that could have left the customer stranded on the freeway. It took him another 3 hours to fix it properly. By the time he finished, it was past 7. Jake had gone home an hour ago. The shop was quiet, except for the hum of the air compressor and the ticking of cooling engines. Marcus sat in his office, a tiny room cluttered with invoices and parts catalogs and family photos he couldn't bear to take down. He pulled up the day's numbers on his ancient computer. After paying for parts and labor and overhead, they'd barely cleared $200. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. A soft knock on the doorframe made him look up. Sarah stood there, wearing her worn jacket, a backpack slung over one shoulder. "I'm heading out," she said. "Is there anything you need before I go?" Marcus wanted to apologize. He wanted to tell her she'd done good work today, that he was wrong, that his anger wasn't really about her, but the words stuck in his throat, hardened by pride and exhaustion and fear. "Just be on time tomorrow," he said instead. Sarah nodded slowly. "Mr. Webb, I know you're under a lot of pressure. I know the business is struggling, but I'm not your enemy. I'm trying to help. If you want to help, work faster," Marcus said, his voice flat. Something flickered across Sarah's face, hurt maybe, or disappointment, but she just nodded again and turned to leave. "Chen," Marcus called out. She paused at the door. "That differential job, it was adequate, good work. It wasn't much. It wasn't enough, but it was all he could manage." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Webb. See you tomorrow." After she left, Marcus sat in the silence of his shop. Through the grimy office window, he could see the empty garage bays, the tools hanging on their shadow boards, the lift arms reaching up like mechanical prayers. This place had been in his family for 3 generations. His grandfather had built it with his own hands after coming back from Korea. His father had expanded it during the boom years of the 80s. And now Marcus was watching it die, inch by inch, day by day, under the weight of competition and debt and his own failing leadership. He thought about Sarah's quiet competence, her attention to detail, the way she'd finished that differential job ahead of schedule despite his harassment. He thought about calling her, apologizing properly, trying to build a bridge he'd been burning since the day she'd started, but he didn't. Pride, that old family curse, kept his hand away from the phone. Marcus turned off the lights and locked up the shop. The temperature had dropped to 12 degrees, and the wind coming off Lake St. Clair cut through his jacket like broken glass. His truck, a 2003 F-150 with 240,000 miles on the odometer, started on the 3rd try. As he drove home through the darkened streets of Detroit, Marcus thought about his father's favorite saying, "A good mechanic knows how to fix anything. A great mechanic knows how to fix it right." He'd been fixing things wrong for a long time now. The question was whether it was too late to learn. The houses in his neighborhood sat dark and tired, their windows reflecting the streetlights like vacant eyes. Marcus pulled into his driveway, killed the engine, and sat in the cold cab for a long moment, gathering the energy to face another empty house, another frozen dinner, another night of bills and worry and regret. Tomorrow would come too soon. Tomorrow always did. And he still wouldn't have any answers. The next morning arrived with fresh snow and darker clouds. Marcus was at the shop by 5 a.m., as always, trying to get ahead of a day that would inevitably get away from him. The coffee he'd grabbed from the gas station tasted like burnt cardboard, but it was hot and it was caffeine, and that was enough. By 7, Jake had arrived, followed shortly by Sarah. She greeted them both with a quiet, "Good morning," and got straight to work on the day's first job, a brake job on a Honda Accord. Marcus noticed she'd brought her own lunch in a small cooler, watched her carefully organize her tools before starting, observed the methodical way she approached every task. Too slow, his mind still insisted, but another part of him, a quieter part, whispered, thorough. The morning's first appointment was a diagnostic on a 2015 Chevy Tahoe. The customer, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Patterson, had been coming to Webb & Sons for years. She described the problem: intermittent stalling, rough idle, occasional loss of power. "Started about 2 weeks ago," she explained, wringing her hands nervously. "My husband says I'm imagining things, but I know something's wrong." Marcus hooked up the diagnostic scanner and ran through the codes. Nothing obvious jumped out, just a few minor sensor readings that were within acceptable parameters. He took the vehicle for a test drive, but it ran perfectly smooth. "I can't find anything wrong," he told Mrs. Patterson when he returned. "All the systems are checking out normal. But I know something's wrong," she insisted, her voice rising with frustration. "It's not my imagination." Marcus felt his patience wearing thin. He had 6 other cars waiting, a parts delivery that was late, and a bank meeting at 3 p.m. that he'd been dreading for days. The last thing he needed was to chase phantom problems in a vehicle that was running fine. "Mom, I've been doing this for 25 years. If there was something wrong, I'd find it. Maybe you're just feeling the normal characteristics of the vehicle. These SUVs can be a little rough sometimes." Mrs. Patterson's face flushed. "I'm not stupid, Mr. Webb. I know my car. Something is wrong." "I didn't say you were stupid," Marcus replied, his voice harder than he intended. "I'm saying the vehicle is fine. There's nothing to fix." Sarah had been working quietly in the next bay, but Marcus saw her glance over at the conversation. Her expression was concerned, but she didn't say anything. Mrs. Patterson left angry, refusing to pay the diagnostic fee. Marcus let her go, too tired to argue. Another bridge burned, another customer relationship damaged. But what was he supposed to do? Invent problems that didn't exist? "Dad," Jake said carefully after Mrs. Patterson had driven away. "Maybe we should have looked a little longer." "There was nothing to find," Marcus snapped. "Sometimes people just want attention. They want someone to tell them they're right, even when they're wrong." He stormed back into his office, leaving Jake standing in the garage bay, looking uncomfortable. The day continued its downward spiral. Danny called to say he'd be out the rest of the week with the flu. Pete's wife called to say Pete had thrown out his back and would need at least a few days off. That left Marcus, Jake, and Sarah to handle everything. Marcus pushed himself harder, working faster, cutting corners he knew better than to cut. By early afternoon, he'd finished an oil change, a brake job, and was halfway through a cooling system flush. His body was screaming at him to slow down, but his mind was screaming louder about the bills, the bank meeting, the slow death of everything his family had built. Around 2 p.m., Marcus started work on his last job before the bank meeting, a routine maintenance service on a 2018 Ford F-250, a commercial vehicle belonging to a construction company that gave Webb & Sons steady business. Oil change, filter replacement, fluid checks. Simple, fast, money in the bank. Marcus worked quickly, his movements automatic. He'd done 1,000 oil changes, maybe 10,000. He could do this job in his sleep. Drain plug out, oil drains, new filter on, new oil in, drain plug back in. Except this time, Marcus's attention was split. He was thinking about the bank meeting, rehearsing what he'd say to the loan officer, trying to find words that would convince someone to give a failing business more time. His hands moved through the motions, while his mind was miles away. He tightened the drain plug, wiped down the pan, added the new oil. He checked the level, started the engine, checked for leaks. Everything looked fine. He lowered the vehicle, wrote up the invoice, and the customer picked it up at 2:30 p.m. Marcus made it to the bank by 3. The meeting went about as well as he'd expected, which is to say, badly. The loan officer, a young woman who looked fresh out of business school, reviewed his numbers with the expression of someone examining a terminal diagnosis. "Mr. Webb, your debt-to-income ratio is concerning. Your revenue has declined steadily for 18 months. Without significant changes to your business model or a substantial capital infusion, I'm afraid we can't extend additional credit." "I just need a little more time," Marcus said, hating the desperation in his voice. "The winter is always slow. Spring will pick up. It always does. Your spring numbers have been declining for 3 years," she replied, not unkindly. "Mr. Webb, I'm not trying to be harsh, but you need to face reality. The business is failing." Marcus left the bank feeling like he'd been gutted. The late afternoon sun was already setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. The cold bit through his jacket, but he barely felt it. He sat in his truck for a long time, staring at nothing, feeling everything. His phone rang. Jake's name appeared on the screen. "Yeah," Marcus answered, his voice hollow. "Dad, we've got a problem, a big problem." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "What? The F-250 that picked up this afternoon? The construction company truck? It broke down on the freeway. Oil pressure dropped to 0. Engine seized. They're saying it's catastrophic damage. The world seemed to tilt. Marcus gripped the steering wheel to steady himself. That's impossible. I just serviced it. Dad, you need to get back here. The owner is on his way and he's pissed. Marcus drove back to the shop in a daze. When he arrived, the construction company owner, a burly man named Kowalski, was already there, standing in the garage with his arms crossed. The anger radiating off him was palpable. "Marcus," Kowalski said, his voice dangerously calm, "we've done business for 12 years. My father did business with your father. I've always trusted you. So I need you to explain to me how a truck that came in for a simple oil change is now sitting on the side of I-94 with a destroyed engine." Marcus's mind was racing, trying to understand what could have gone wrong. "I did everything by the book. I checked everything. There's no way." "The tow truck driver says the engine is bone dry," Kowalski continued. "No oil. None. Like someone forgot to put it back in." "I added the oil," Marcus insisted. "I checked the level. I always check the level." "Then where did it go, Marcus? Did it evaporate? Did it just decide to leave?" Sarah appeared from the back of the shop. She'd been working quietly all afternoon, staying out of the way of the drama. But now she stepped forward, her voice soft but clear. "Mr. Webb, can I speak with you privately for a moment?" "Not now, Chen," Marcus said, his attention fixed on Kowalski. "It's important," Sarah insisted. "I said not now." Kowalski looked between them, his jaw working. "I've got a $45,000 truck with a blown engine. I've got a crew sitting idle because they can't get to the job site. I've got losses piling up by the hour, and I've got a mechanic who can't explain what went wrong. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to pay for a new engine, you're going to cover my lost business, and then we're going to talk about whether I file a lawsuit for negligence." "I can't afford that," Marcus said quietly. The words felt like admitting defeat, like admitting he'd lost everything. "Then you're going to lose more than money," Kowalski replied. "Your reputation, your business, everything. I'll make sure every contractor in Detroit knows what happened here." He turned and walked toward the door. "You've got 24 hours to figure out how you're going to make this right. After that, my lawyer gets involved." The door slammed behind him, and the silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stood frozen, his mind trying to process what had just happened. This wasn't just a mistake. This was the end. Even if it wasn't his fault, even if something freak had happened, the cost of fixing it would destroy him. The lawsuit would destroy him. The reputation damage would destroy him. "Mr. Webb," Sarah said again, her voice gentle. Marcus turned on her, all his fear and anger and desperation finding a target. "What? What do you want? Can't you see I'm dealing with a catastrophe here?" Sarah didn't flinch. She walked over to his toolbox and picked up something small. When she came back, she held out her hand. In her palm was an oil drain plug, still dark, with old oil. "I found this on the floor under Bay 3, she said quietly. "That's where you worked on the F-250. Marcus stared at the drain plug. His drain plug, the one that should have been on the truck. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not possible. I put it back on. I know I did." "I think you forgot," Sarah said, her voice infinitely kind. "I think you were distracted and you drained the oil, and you forgot to put the plug back in. Then you added fresh oil, but it just drained right back out. When the customer drove away, there was probably enough residual oil in the system to keep it running for a few miles. But then," she didn't need to finish. Marcus knew what happened then. The engine ran dry. Metal ground against metal. Pistons seized, catastrophic failure, and it was his fault. Marcus felt his legs go weak. He sat down heavily on a shop stool, the drain plug still in Sarah's outstretched hand. "I destroyed a man's truck," he said, his voice empty. "I destroyed his business. I destroyed my business because I forgot one drain plug." Jake stood nearby, his young face pale with shock. Sarah remained where she was, still holding the evidence of Marcus's mistake. "I can fix this," Sarah said suddenly. Marcus looked up at her, not comprehending. "What?" I can fix this, she repeated, her dark eyes intense. Not the engine, that's destroyed. But I can make it right. I know how. How? Marcus demanded. Do you have a magic wand? Can you turn back time? Better, Sarah said. She pulled out her phone and started typing rapidly. I have connections, and I have an idea. Marcus watched in confusion as Sarah made 3 phone calls in quick succession. She spoke quietly, urgently in a mixture of English and what sounded like Chinese. When she finished, she looked at Marcus with something like determination. I used to work for a Ford dealer in California, she began. I still have friends there, including the parts manager. I just called in a favor, a big favor. He's going to get us a remanufactured engine for that F-250 at dealer cost. No markup. That's going to save us about $6,000 off retail. That's still more money than I have, Marcus said bitterly. I'm not finished, Sarah continued. I also called my former boss, who now runs an independent shop in Oakland. He owes me for covering his mistakes when I worked there. He's agreed to walk us through the replacement process via video call, for free, saving us the labor cost of farming it out. And I called my brother, Sarah finished. He's a corporate attorney. He'll represent you pro bono if Kowalski tries to sue. He'll also help draft a payment plan that might be acceptable. Marcus stared at her. Why would you do this? After how I've treated you? After I called you good for nothing? Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Because I know what it's like to make a mistake that costs everything, and I know what it's like when someone gives you a second chance. I don't understand, Marcus whispered. You will, Sarah replied. But right now, we need to call Kowalski back and make him an offer. We need to show him we're taking responsibility and have a real plan to fix this. If we move fast, we might be able to salvage this. Marcus looked at Jake, who nodded encouragingly. Then he looked back at Sarah, this small woman with intense eyes and a quiet strength he'd completely underestimated. Okay, he said finally. Okay, let's do it. The next few hours were a blur of phone calls, negotiations, and planning. Sarah took the lead, speaking with Kowalski in calm, reasonable tones, laying out a specific timeline and cost breakdown. She presented the plan with such confidence and clarity that even Kowalski's anger began to cool. By 9 p.m., they had an agreement. Webb & Sons would replace the engine at cost plus labor, a total of about $12,000, which was less than half what Kowalski had feared. Marcus would make an initial payment of $3,000 and the rest over 6 months. Kowalski would hold off on the lawsuit and the reputation damage as long as Marcus stuck to the payment plan. It was still devastating. It was still money Marcus didn't have, but it was survivable, barely. After Kowalski left, Jake hugged his father tightly. It's going to be okay, Dad, he said. Marcus couldn't speak. He just held his son and tried not to break down completely. When Jake finally left for the night, only Marcus and Sarah remained in the shop. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the empty bays. I'm sorry, Marcus said finally, for everything, for how I've treated you, for the things I said, for being blind and stupid and cruel. Sarah leaned against a workbench, her arms crossed. Why were you so hard on me? She asked. From the first day, you seemed to have decided I couldn't do the job. Marcus rubbed his face with his hands. I don't know. Fear, maybe. Fear that you were too good, that you'd leave as soon as you found something better. Fear that you'd show up everyone else in the shop and make me look incompetent. Fear that everything was changing and I couldn't keep up. I'm not your enemy, Sarah said quietly. I know, Marcus replied. I know that now. But I still don't understand why you helped me, why you saved me after I treated you like garbage. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. Then she said, I told you I know what it's like to make a mistake that costs everything. 3 years ago, I was working at a Honda dealer in San Francisco. I was the lead tech, youngest person to hold that position. I was proud, maybe too proud. She paused, gathering her words. I misdiagnosed a transmission problem on a customer's car, told them it needed a complete replacement when it was actually just a sensor. The customer trusted me, spent $6,000 on the repair. 2 weeks later, the same problem came back. They took it to another shop, found out the truth, filed a complaint with Honda and with the state licensing board. "What happened?" Marcus asked. "I lost my job, lost my reputation. The dealer threw me under the bus to protect themselves. Other shops in the area heard about it, and no one would hire me. My boyfriend at the time said I was damaged goods and left. I had to move back home with my parents at 26 years old, completely broke and completely broken." Sarah's voice remained steady, but Marcus could see the pain in her eyes. "My father is the one who helped me rebuild. He's a retired mechanic, worked in a small shop in Chinatown for 40 years. He told me that everyone makes mistakes, but only the strong admit them and learn from them. He made me study again, practice again, be humble again. And when I was ready, he helped me find work. Small jobs at first, building back my reputation one repair at a time. I came to Detroit because my brother moved here for his law practice," she continued. "I wanted a fresh start, somewhere people didn't know about my mistake. Your shop was the first one willing to take a chance on me." Marcus felt shame wash over him. "And I treated you like you were worthless." "You treated me like someone who needed to prove themselves," Sarah corrected. "And maybe I did. But more importantly, you needed someone to prove to you that you're not alone, that even when you make a mistake, even a catastrophic one, you can survive it if you have people who believe in you." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of shared understanding settling between them. "The engine replacement," Marcus said finally. "It's going to take everything I have. I might still lose the shop." "Maybe," Sarah acknowledged. "Or maybe this is the wake-up call you needed. Maybe this is the moment you stop trying to do everything alone and start building a real team." "A team," Marcus repeated, the word feeling foreign in his mouth. "Jake is good," Sarah said. "He's young, but he has instincts, and I'm not going anywhere unless you fire me. Between the three of us, we can handle this, but you have to trust us. You have to stop carrying everything yourself." Marcus looked around the garage. His grandfather's dream, his father's legacy, his own burden. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine it as something other than a weight dragging him down. Maybe, just maybe, it could be a foundation to build on. "Okay," he said. "Okay, but I need to ask you something." "What?" Sarah replied. "How do I stop being the person who makes these mistakes? How do I stop destroying everything I touch?" Sarah smiled sadly. "You don't. You're human. You'll make mistakes, but you learn to catch them earlier. You learn to ask for help. You learn that your worth isn't measured by your perfection, but by how you respond when you fail." Marcus nodded slowly. The words settled into him like oil into a dry engine, necessary and painful and healing all at once. "Thank you," he said simply, "for seeing something in me worth saving." "Thank you for being worth saving," Sarah replied. They locked up the shop together and walked out into the cold Detroit night. The temperature had dropped to single digits and fresh snow was beginning to fall. But somehow, Marcus felt warmer than he had in months. Tomorrow they would start the engine replacement. Tomorrow they would begin rebuilding more than just a truck. Tomorrow everything would be different. But tonight, in this moment, Marcus allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. When they returned to the shop, Kowalski killed the engine and sat in silence for a moment. Then he turned to look back at Marcus. "I was ready to destroy you," Kowalski said bluntly. "My lawyer had the paperwork drawn up. I was going to make sure every contractor in Michigan knew what happened. I was going to bury you." Marcus swallowed hard, but said nothing. "But this," Kowalski continued, gesturing to the truck, "this is what I should have gotten in the first place. This is the level of work I expected. And you know what changed?" "What?" Marcus asked quietly. "You stopped making excuses and started taking responsibility," Kowalski replied. "You admitted the mistake. You came up with a real plan. And you delivered. He gestured to Sarah. And you brought in someone who clearly knows what she's doing. Sarah inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement. I'm still angry, Kowalski said. This cost me time and money, but I respect how you handled it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm accepting the truck. I'm agreeing to the payment plan. And if you continue delivering work at this level, I'll continue bringing my fleet to you, all 12 vehicles. Marcus felt relief crash over him like a wave. Thank you. You won't regret it. See that I don't, Kowalski replied. He shook Marcus's hand, then Sarah's, then Jake's. As he and Hendricks drove away in the restored F-250, Marcus stood in the parking lot feeling like he'd just survived a near-death experience. We did it, Jake breathed. We actually did it. We did it, Sarah echoed with a smile. Marcus looked at both of them, his son growing into a skilled technician and responsible adult, and Sarah, the woman he'd dismissed and insulted, who had saved everything worth saving. He felt gratitude so profound it was almost painful. I need to make some changes, Marcus announced suddenly. Real changes. Not just in how the shop runs, but in who I am. Over the next several hours, Marcus did something he should have done years ago. He asked for help. He sat down with Sarah and Jake and went through every aspect of the business, looking for inefficiencies, problems, and opportunities. Sarah suggested implementing a quality control system. Every completed job would be inspected by someone other than the person who did the work. 2 sets of eyes catch mistakes before they leave the shop, she explained. Jake proposed creating a social media presence and offering first-time customer discounts to attract new business. Everyone under 30 looks for shops online, Dad. We need to be where they're looking. Marcus agreed to both ideas and added one of his own. Weekly team meetings where anyone could raise concerns or suggest improvements without fear of criticism. No more dictatorship, he said. We're a team. We act like one. They put out an ad for an apprentice position and were surprised by the response. 15 applicants in 2 days. Sarah helped conduct interviews, and they settled on a 20-year-old named Marcus, coincidentally, from the community college program. Young Marcus was eager, humble, and showed promise. Within a week, the shop felt different. There was a rhythm to the work, a sense of shared purpose. Customers started commenting on the improved service. The online reviews, which had been trending negative for months, began to shift positive. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after the F-250 incident, Mrs. Patterson, the woman with the Tahoe, returned to the shop. Marcus felt his stomach clench, remembering how he'd dismissed her concerns. Mrs. Patterson, he said, approaching her vehicle, I owe you an apology. Yes, you do, she replied, but her voice wasn't angry. But that's not why I'm here. My Tahoe has been stalling again, exactly like I told you it would. Bring it in, Marcus said immediately. No charge for the diagnostic, and this time I promise we'll find the problem. He assigned Sarah to the job, with Jake assisting. Marcus watched them work, noting how Sarah listened carefully to Mrs. Patterson's description of the symptoms, how she asked follow-up questions, how she treated the customer's observations as valuable data rather than hysteria. Sarah spent 3 hours on the diagnosis, going far deeper than Marcus had. She found the issue, an intermittent fuel pump relay that was failing only under specific conditions. It was exactly the kind of problem that wouldn't show up on a quick diagnostic scan, but would be obvious if you listened to the customer and pursued the symptoms methodically. You were right, Sarah told Mrs. Patterson when she presented the findings. Something was definitely wrong. I'm sorry it took us 2 visits to find it. Mrs. Patterson's relief was visible. So, I'm not crazy. Not even a little bit, Sarah assured her. You know your vehicle. You knew something was off. We should have listened better the first time. After the repair was completed, and after Marcus personally knocked 25% off the bill as an apology, Mrs. Patterson shook his hand warmly. Thank you for making this right, she said, and thank you for listening this time. After she left, Marcus approached Sarah at her workstation. You made me look good there. Better than I deserve. I made you look like someone who learns from mistakes, Sarah corrected. That's better than looking perfect. Perfect is boring. Growth is inspiring. As winter gave way to early spring, the shop continued to improve. The debt was being paid down, slowly but steadily. New customers were coming in, attracted by the positive reviews and word of mouth. The team was functioning smoothly, with everyone contributing ideas and supporting each other. Young Marcus, the apprentice, was progressing rapidly under Sarah's mentorship. She taught him the same lessons her father had taught her: patience, precision, respect for the craft. Marcus Sr. watched the relationship develop and saw echoes of his own relationship with his father decades ago. One Saturday afternoon in March, when the shop was closed, Marcus asked Sarah if she'd stay after hours to help him with a personal project. She agreed, curious. Marcus led her to the back of the shop, where an old vehicle sat under a tarp. He pulled the cover off, revealing a 1967 Ford Mustang, his grandfather's car, the vehicle the original Marcus Webb had driven every day for 30 years. "I've been meaning to restore this for 20 years, Marcus said, running his hand along the faded paint. "Never had the time, never had the energy, always some excuse, but I think it's time to stop making excuses." "It's beautiful," Sarah said, walking around the car. "Lot of work, though. Frame looks rusty. Engine's probably seized. This is a 2-year project, minimum." "I know," Marcus replied. "That's why I'm hoping you'll help me, not as an employee, as a partner. I want to restore this together, in our spare time. No rush, no pressure, just 2 people working on something they care about." Sarah looked at him surprised. "You want to spend more time with me? After everything?" "Because of everything," Marcus corrected. "You showed me how to do this right, how to approach work with patience and care, how to build something meaningful instead of just surviving day to day. I want to learn more from you, and maybe, along the way, we'll build something beyond just a car." Sarah smiled, that transformation that lit up her reserved face. "Okay, but I have conditions. Name them. We document everything, we take our time, and when it's done, we take it to a car show, and we tell people it was a team effort. Not your project. Ours. Deal," Marcus said, extending his hand. They shook on it, and then spent the next hour examining the Mustang, making plans, dreaming about possibilities. As they worked, Marcus realized something profound. He was happy. Actually, genuinely happy. Not the desperate, fleeting satisfaction of finishing a job, but a deep contentment that came from purpose and connection. That evening, after Sarah had gone home, Marcus sat in his office and did something he'd been putting off for weeks. He pulled out a pen and paper, actual paper, not a computer, and wrote a letter. "Dear Dad," it began, "I know you've been gone for 8 years, but I needed to tell you something. I almost lost the shop. I almost lost everything. But I learned something you tried to teach me, and I was too stubborn to hear. Admitting weakness isn't failure. Asking for help isn't defeat. Being vulnerable is the bravest thing a person can do." He wrote for an hour, filling pages with thoughts he'd never shared, feelings he'd never expressed, apologies he'd never made. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully and put it in an envelope. The next day was Sunday. Marcus drove to the cemetery where his father and grandfather were buried, side by side under an old oak tree. He stood at their graves, reading the letter aloud, his voice steady despite the emotion. "I'm going to make you proud," he finished. "Not by being perfect, not by never making mistakes, but by building something real, something meaningful, something worth passing on. I'm going to teach Jake what you taught me, but I'm going to do it better. With patience, with humility, with love." He placed the letter in a metal box he'd brought and buried it at the base of the oak tree. It was a symbolic gesture, maybe even silly, but it felt like closure, like forgiveness, like a new beginning. 3 months later, on a warm June evening, Marcus hosted a barbecue at the shop for the team and their families. Sarah brought her parents, Chen Wei and his wife, who Marcus found himself instantly liking. Chen Wei was in his 70s now, retired, but his eyes still lit up when he talked about cars. "Your daughter saved my business," Marcus told him. "Saved me, really." Chen Wei smiled, a knowing expression that suggested he understood more than Marcus had said. "Sarah tells me you are good man, proud man, stubborn man, but good man. That is enough. Good man can learn. Perfect man has nothing more to discover." Jake and young Marcus were grilling burgers and hot dogs, laughing about something on young Marcus's phone. Kowalski had stopped by earlier, bringing his whole family and 3 cases of beer. He and Marcus had talked shop for an hour, the conversation easy and friendly, the old tension completely gone. As the sun set over Detroit, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Marcus stood with Sarah at the edge of the parking lot, watching the celebration. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything, for saving the engine, for saving me." "You saved yourself," Sarah replied. "I just gave you the tools." "No," Marcus insisted. "I called you good for nothing. I was wrong. You were everything. You still are." Sarah looked at him, those intense dark eyes reflecting the sunset. "You know what my father told me before I left California to come here?" "What?" "He said, when you find people worth working for, you've found family. When you find work worth doing, you've found purpose. When you find both in the same place, you've found home." She gestured to the shop, to the people laughing and eating and enjoying the evening. "I think I've found home, Marcus." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Me too. For the first time in a long time, me too." So they stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun disappear below the horizon. The shop sign, newly repaired, all letters working, glowed against the darkening sky. Webb and Sons Auto Repair. 3 generations of work, 3 generations of dreams. And now, with Sarah and the team they were building, maybe a 4th generation, maybe a future, maybe hope. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge, Marcus thought about engines and mistakes, about pride and redemption, about the long road from good for nothing to family. He thought about how a single moment, a forgotten drain plug, had broken everything, and how the same moment had created the opportunity to rebuild something stronger. And he thought about Sarah Chen, the woman who had fixed more than just an engine. She'd fixed a broken man who didn't realize how badly he needed saving until someone cared enough to try. The barbecue continued into the night, filled with laughter and stories and the simple joy of people who'd been through fire together and emerged on the other side. Marcus looked at each face, Jake, young Marcus, Sarah, her parents, his customers who'd become friends, and felt gratitude so profound it was almost overwhelming. This was success. Not the balance sheet, though, that was improving. Not the growing customer base, though, that mattered. This gathering of people who cared about each other, who supported each other, who'd learned to build something together. This was what his grandfather had really created all those years ago. Not just a business, but a place where people could come together, solve problems, and find meaning in honest work. And now, with Sarah's help, Marcus was learning to build that too. One repair at a time. One relationship at a time. One day at a time. The sign glowed in the darkness. Webb & Sons Auto Repair. But Marcus was already thinking about new lettering. Webb & Chen Auto Repair. Partners. It would take time. They'd need to formalize it, make it legal, figure out the finances. But the important part was already done. They were already partners in every way that mattered. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Sarah approached Marcus one more time. "See you Monday?" she asked. "Monday," Marcus confirmed. "We've got a full schedule and a Mustang that needs work." Sarah grinned. "Good. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else." Neither would I, Marcus thought as he watched her drive away. Neither would I. The shop stood quiet now, the celebration over, the parking lot empty except for Marcus's truck. He locked the doors, turned off the lights, and stood for a moment in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of the building settling, smelling the familiar scents of oil and metal and possibility. This place had almost died. He had almost killed it through pride and stubbornness and fear, but instead it had been reborn, transformed by the simple act of letting someone help, of admitting he couldn't do it alone, of recognizing that strength sometimes looks like vulnerability. I called her good for nothing, Marcus thought as he climbed into his truck and started the engine. But she fixed more than the engine that almost killed me. She fixed the heart that was already dead. And as he drove home through the warm Detroit night, Marcus Webb smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new problems, new opportunities to make mistakes and learn from them. But he wouldn't face them alone. Never again. He had a team now. He had family. He had purpose. He had everything that mattered, and it had all started with a mistake, a broken engine, and a woman he'd underestimated. A woman who'd proven that good for nothing was just another way of saying everything I needed.